Hello everyone, my name is Izzy and welcome to Clear IT. The next thing that's important to understand, which can get a little tricky, and that's the naming convention. So understanding how to read the CPU. So we mentioned this in i3 and i5, i7, but there are many i3s, there are many i5s, there are many i7s. So let me explain to you how it works. And again, luckily for us, AMD recently switched their naming convention to be the same as Intel, which just makes it a whole lot easier. So let's take a look at this. Okay, the first thing we could see is what they call the brand modifier. So this is an i7. Okay, easy enough. We understand 3, 5, 7. Let's say the 5 is better than the i3, the i7 is better than the i5, and so on. Usually that'll be followed by a hyphen and some more numbers. Okay, the next number represents the generation. Okay, so Intel has been making CPUs for a while. They've been making their i-series CPUs for a while. Now they're up to the 10th generation. The current generation is 10th gen. Okay, so we were seeing, i5 or i7, let's say 7500. Then there was an 80, whatever, 80 something, 100, 90, and then finally 10. So I told you it's the first number. Technically, now that it's 10, it's the first two numbers. But we'll just, for simplicity, we'll just call it that first number. Okay, so the first number is the generation. I have had people come over to me, look at this, look at it, it's an i7, it's a fantastic deal, it's only $200 on eBay. And then I asked them, what generation is it? Oh, second. Oh, okay, well, it's a little old. If it's second generation, it's going to be a little bit old by now. Are you sure you want to buy something that old? Not to mention that, may not be compatible with all kinds of other things. So a good question is, how old can we get? In July 2020, I would say 8th gen and up is okay. 8th, 9th, 10 is all totally acceptable for now. Anything older than that, it's already a little old, So that's the first thing. Intel, again, right now they're up to 10th gen. The AMD Ryzens are up to 3rd, so that their first number will be a 3, or 2 or 3 are the current generation. And then the next one is a number, or the next 3 numbers that kind of go in order based on power. So you might have a 7500, you may have a 7800, you may have, a 71 something, 7110 or 7180 or whatever they have. We'll take a look in a minute, and you'll see that these numbers pretty much represent how powerful the CPU is. Okay, so your i3s have the lowest numbers, then your i5s a little higher, i7 a little higher, i9 even higher. Now again, even within i3 or 5, you can have multiples. But for the most part, you get your generation, you get your series, is it an i7, and that'll kind of put you in a range with that next number. Okay, and finally, some CPUs, but not all, have a suffix, a letter at the end. Okay, there's 3 I want to mention specifically. Number 1 is the U. The U stands for ultra low power. This is what we find in laptops. If it has a U, that means it is a laptop CPU, and if that's a concern of yours, you may want to stay away from that. Okay, so again, if you know the exact CPU you have in there, you could identify, is it a laptop or not? That's the U. Then there's the H. The H is their desktop, is for the desktop. So you may find a laptop that has an H CPU in it, which means, a higher end laptop. And they're basically saying, listen, we understand you need the best performance here. We're going to give you a desktop CPU. So that's the H. And finally, K. The K is an unlocked CPU that allows overclocking. Okay, overclocking means that even though it has a baseline and it has limits to how many gigahertz it's supposed to use, they allow you to manually override that, change that, and overclock your CPU. Whether or not that's a good idea or not, I don't know. Often it voids the warranty. That's not for no reason. You could definitely damage your CPU if you overclock. But again, if you want to get better performance out of the CPU, if you have a K at the end of the CPU, it can be overclocked. So let's go ahead. Let's jump back online. Let's take a look at a typical computer and what that might look like. Okay, I'm just going to go for a desktop. I'll grab any. First one here is fine. And this has an Intel i5 9500. This is a pretty good CPU. It's a 9th, so let's talk about these numbers. It's an i5, it's a 9th gen i5, and it is the 500. Okay, there's a lower number, there's a higher number. You can see it's grayed out here, it's not available, but there is a, let's see if we can get that, and we'll change it to 4 gig RAM. The i3, for example, is not a 9500, it's a 9100. Okay, so it's the same 9th gen, but it's an i3, and it drops from 500 to 100, so it's weaker. And it's not 6 cores, it's only 4 cores, it's quad core, which is great too. But we'll see that. Let's go ahead, let's go for, let's say, an i7. Desktop i7. Again, let's stick with the same series just because we started with these. And you'll see in here, this is the 9700, so it's an i7 9th gen 700, and it has 8 cores, and that is a pretty solid machine. Okay, now there are other things that they put in here that gives it that price tag. It's not just the CPU, but for now we'll just focus on this. It's the i7 9700. Let's take a quick look at an AMD. Okay, let's grab this one. And you can see here it's a Ryzen 5 3400G. Okay, so that's the Ryzen 5. That's the kind of like the i5, it's the Ryzen 5. It's the 3rd generation, and then 400G is the model. Okay, so that's how we read the CPU. So you may be wondering, there's so many CPUs out there. How do I know which one's right for me? How do I know which one's the best? Do I get an i5? Do I get an i7? Do I get this generation, that generation? Do I go with AMD? Do I go with Intel? And the answer is you check the benchmarks. So there's websites dedicated to just this exactly, benchmarking. They test different CPUs, real world tests, with real applications, editing videos, playing games, doing all kinds of different things. And then we have real results, and we know exactly how well every CPU performs. So if you want to compare, or you're not sure, or whatever it may be, check the benchmarks. So let's give an example of that. Okay, I'm going to go search for CPU benchmark, and we'll grab the first site. And a site like this should have very good benchmarks. And tell us exactly what we need to know about a particular CPU, or maybe a comparison. Let's do a comparison here between the Intel Core i5, let's say this one, and the AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. Okay, and here you have it. So we got price differences, socket type, clock speed, turbo speed, number of physical cores, wattage, release dates, how many samples. That's also important. They don't have a lot of these. This is just came out. This has been around for a little longer. And here they each get a score. Okay, so it looks like the AMD outperformed the Intel on this one. And as you go through, you can get all kinds of detailed comparisons. Again, this is only one site. Okay, so don't forget, when it comes to buying a CPU or choosing, again, if you really want to get it right and you're not sure, benchmarking is the way to go for that. You could benchmark, you could test, there are tools to test your own CPU and see how well it performs, and that is benchmarking. Okay, what causes the CPU to die? Okay, so we've all had computers. They don't last forever. Sometimes the part that goes bad is the CPU. There are three main causes that may contribute to the death or the failing of your CPU. Number one is heat. CPU overheats, it can get damaged, it can get permanently damaged. Okay, we talked about overclocking. That might be one of those reasons, something that can be a contributing factor to overheat your CPU and damage it. As a matter of fact, computers are designed when the CPU gets too hot to shut down so that the CPU doesn't get damaged. Okay. Additionally, if your fan is broken, okay, so the heat is not being dispersed properly, or maybe you don't have fans properly installed in your computer, that could cause the CPU to get hot and get damaged. Thermal paste, we'll talk about thermal paste in a moment, but thermal paste is needed on top of the CPU. If you don't have thermal paste also, you could have a problem where the CPU is not functioning properly. I actually had a computer once where someone complained that the fan was going crazy. Now I actually took a look at it and I noticed there was a little plastic cover on top of the CPU. Whoever built it never took the cover off the CPU, and it couldn't disperse the heat. It was getting so hot, and the fans were just going, at 100% to try to, cool down the CPU. Took off the plastic and it was fine. Age, of course, computers get old. They're not designed to last forever, and eventually they get old and something is going to fail. It can be the CPU. Finally, and this is probably the most common, this is what I see the most of, and that is a power surge. Okay, whenever there's a storm, there's a couple of these that happen. Okay, so you have a power surge, again, usually accompanied by a storm, bad weather, whatever it may be, maybe a power outage, the power goes back on, whatever it is, there is a surge, and your CPU gets fried. Okay, usually the CPU is the most expensive part on the computer. Usually once the CPU goes, it is not worth replacing. That may not always be the case. Certainly in the business world, it's not worth it. It's not worth paying for a technician and the part to replace the CPU. At home, if you want to play around, sure, whatever works. These are the three most common reasons for a CPU to be damaged and no longer function. Specifically with the power surge, it is easy to avoid. It really is. Everybody should really always have their hardware plugged into surge protectors. Okay, I'm not saying you have to go out and buy a $1,000 battery now to keep all your computer on, all your computer equipment on all the time. A basic surge protector from Amazon or wherever will go a very, very long way in protecting your equipment, and it's worth the $20 to get the surge protector or whatever they cost, and not have to go ahead and replace your whole computer or parts that got damaged from the surge. So definitely everybody should have. Maybe I'll show you what I use. Usually give these out, these Belkins. They're great, they work fine. They make a 12 outlet one, they make an 8 outlet one, and again for $20 or whatever it is to save your computer or your whatever other hardware you may have, well worth it. So definitely go for that. Okay, and finally I want to talk about how to actually install the CPU. Okay, it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot you need to do. First thing, of course, is there's a little socket. You got to open it up. If there's a fan on top or heatsink, you got to remove that. But then really all you need to do, obviously keeping it clean, keeping everything clean. We don't want to get dust in there. You take the CPU, it only fits in one way. You stick it in, you close the socket. We did it in the last video. If you didn't see that, run back and check that out. you put thermal paste. This is a picture of thermal paste. Just a little bit, they say like a pea size or whatever it might be. And you will place the heatsink on top of that. This will it'll spread out over the CPU. This helps the heat disperse from the CPU up through the heatsink, and then usually there are fans on top. If it's a laptop, maybe it's not exactly designed that way, and that carries out the heat and prevents your CPU from getting damaged, as we discussed. Okay, so this is a full overview of how the CPU works, and what you need to look for when you're buying computers. Thanks for watching, guys. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video. And of course, don't forget to comment. Ask questions, share your experiences, and I'll see you in the next video.